Hello, everyone. Hi. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. Thank you, Dean Alhori, and our sponsors, Tecnoglass and AIA Miami, for your incredible support for this lecture series. My name is Lily Wong. I'm the new assistant professor at the School of Architecture. I'm also the person who's organizing this semester's Tecnoglass lecture series entitled Architecture and Vegetal Life. So this series aims to explore how designing for and with plants can shape alternative ways of designing buildings, assumptions and knowledge about architecture, as well as the act of planting as a form of empowerment. Just two logistical notes. Number one, please email Shana Maya to receive your AIA continuing education credit if you need it. And number two, our guests tonight, ChartierDalix, they're also having an exhibition that just opened last night in the design district. The exhibition will stay open for 2 more weeks. So if you are around the area, you're welcome to go and see more of their work. And they have some really wonderful models on display as well. All right, tonight we are pleased to welcome Frederic Chartier and Pascale Dalix, principals of ChartierDalix from Paris to Miami. I would like to also take this opportunity to thank my really good friend Cecil Barnes. I think he might be watching online from Paris for introducing me to ChartierDalix work a few years ago. And also thank you to the team at ChartierDalix. Amy Martinel for coordinating their visit. Before I introduce our guest speakers tonight, I would also maybe want to spend a minute to explain the format tonight. So Frederic and Pascale will speak for about 35 to 40 minutes, followed by a conversation with two of our professors at the School of Architecture. Professor Carrie Pennebat and Professor Andrew Klum will join us on stage. I know they don't really need an introduction at the school, but I will also say a few words about each of them. Professor Pennebat is an architect and professor of architecture. Her firm, Curie and Pennebat, has received over 20 awards, the AIA Awards, and also the prestigious Emerging Voices Award from the Architectural League in New York. They have realized many projects in Miami and in Latin America and beyond. Andrew Klum is an architect currently teaching first-year studio. He is also a graduate of the School of Architecture here. He's co-founder of Overhead Studio, currently working on a range of projects from urban design to furniture design. He's the author of Delirious Miami and a guest editor of the journal Islandia. Now, I would like to introduce our speakers tonight. It is really an honor to welcome Frederic and Pascale to Miami. ChartierDalix is an acclaimed architecture and landscape firm started in Paris in 2008. The firm has completed a range of projects in Europe, including schools, social housing, student housing, logistical centers, and public landscapes. So many of these building types, we study them in our studio at the school. For them, architecture is considered as a built system that combines the means to welcome life, poetry, and the commons. Architecture plays ecological and social roles beyond the confine of its building. Even though today's conversation will focus more on the building systems that host ecological life, creating commons and adaptive reuse are also at the core of ChartierDalix design design ethos. But to cover that, it would take, I don't know, 2 more lectures. The firm has received many prestigious awards in Europe and the United States. More recently, their work has been exhibited at the Paris Olympics last year and the 2023 Chicago Biennial. A monograph of their work, ChartierDalix Built Work Archives 2008 to 2022, was published in 2023. And another book, Hosting Life Architecture as an Ecosystem, was published in 2019. Frederic and Pascale has generously donated those books to our library, so they will be available at our library soon. So in case you guys want to take a closer look at their projects after the lecture. So I don't want to speak more because I know you guys can't wait to hear from Pascale and Frederic. So please join me and welcome ChartierDalix.
Thank you, Lily. Thank you at the University of Miami to invite us. An honor for us to be here. It's photos of Franco Fontana, an Italian photographer who captures landscape fragments show in an abstract way. This highly poetic image is also overwhelming, as this fragment of nature is in fact an ecological desert, much poorer than this piece of forest, which is not in the middle of the nature, but perched 12 meters above the ground of the roof of a school near Paris. This hybridization illustrates a paradigm shift in which the rural world, subjected to intensive agri-food activity, continues to become sterilized, while cities are developing a new relationship with nature with a firm determination to get closer to it or even reintroduce it. If as most studies predict, 2/3 of the world's population will be living in cities by 2050, we need to reflect on urban space and its capacity to reconnect with the living. In fact, the resilient city is one that will reintroduce flexibility into spatial planning by promoting diversity at very fine scales. Welcoming living things into the urban environment opens up a whole new field of thought. Firstly, because it provides of opportunity to rethink our place in the world of the living and perhaps to move beyond the man-nature dualism. But also, and it is what we are going to develop today, because it represents a real lever for rethinking the city of tomorrow, and this on 3 different scales. We will look at landscape as a structural element of architecture, then at the social benefits it offers in inhabited spaces, and finally, at applied research into the interweaving of architecture and nature on a material scale. First one, the project shaped by the landscape. The city has become a place of anti-nature. The living, considered as invasive, has been ousted, replaced by a world that suits us, made up of free-line avenues and closed squares and parks. Today, nature and in the city has been reduced to a color, a decor, considered to be almost inert. However, it is possible to conceive of the living and the urban in a different kind of relationship, based more on reciprocity, changing the city by involving animal and plant species in an ecological process in a means of preserving our species for the long term. It is also an opportunity to making, to leave behind in relationship of dominance to place itself in a bond of coexistence with all living things. But it might also be a unique opportunity to overturn our value so that the design of the unbuilt occupies a role that is just as important as that the build itself constitutes the cornerstone of our philosophy. For us, it is an incentive to consider ecology in the same way as architecture.
So I'm going to present you some project in these three parts of this lecture. Pascale will always miss this introduction, showing a lot of our idea, our philosophy, and then I am responsible of presenting the project more into detail. So this is a project which was built like a couple of years ago in Paris. This is a school, University of Law. And this was actually the renovation, rehabilitation of an old military barracks in the middle of Paris. So on this image, you see the two existing buildings on each side, and then the parade ground, which is just a field for the military to make them the parade every day. So now more buildings have come around, like these two residential buildings for militaries, and then this space is not even a center for this for the whole campus. So the competition was about creating another building, which is a new auditorium on site. And so we were thinking about these existing very beautiful trees that is around the parade ground, and then thinking maybe we shouldn't add another building, but maybe create a garden. And this is what Pascale was saying about landscape as a structural element of architecture, is thinking more about the void, creating a garden rather than adding another building on that. So we decided to link those two buildings that you can see here on the images, this building and this building, not with a new auditorium, which could have been very exciting for us, creating a new building, but maybe creating a gallery, underground gallery that could link these two buildings. And this gallery is inside a new garden. So at the end, we just dig a little bit on the ground and creating three different pathways, three different stairs with different speeds for the student to come into the entrance of the university. So the stairs are different scales, so that it depends if you are in a hurry or if you have time. You can enter this and then cross this garden, being quiet, coming out from the very loud city, and then entering this the university by this opening on the ground, this opening on a garden, this like a scar on the garden. So we created like places to sit and communal spaces for the student to be inside. And instead of adding an architecture, we're just creating a garden and subtracting things rather than adding one. So I think this is also a first step for us, thinking gardening, thinking architecture, and thinking architecture by the landscape and not in the inverse situation. So we used also this rusted metal, because I think this is very more a landscape material that we use a lot in the gardens rather than in architecture. So you're coming down from the city and entering this gallery, and then here you see the section where you just cross the garden, entering the gallery, which is here, links these two buildings, and then going back into an auditorium. Because what was interesting here is that you had these two levels of parking that were totally empty. So we decided and we convinced the client saying, okay, maybe we should use this space, this volume, which is already built, rather than adding another building, than just destroying these intermediate slabs and creating an auditorium inside of it. So using what is already existing, not maybe acting by addition, but acting by subtraction is also a very interesting meaning act for us. And then just show it very quickly, but how we just work on the stairs and then creating this old barrack, transforming them, just creating these beautiful stairs that gives also a sense of public space rather than only rooms. And then thinking about the existing structure, because we couldn't break all the walls that is inside here, because there were just rooms. So we decided to disconnect the intermediate wall from the facade. So to create like in French, you can call an enfilade. So that creating the sensation of a space, but without creating a very large space. And then we have also this reuse material to create these lamps and then creating this atmosphere inside of it. So this was the first project, very simple, how the acting on the landscape is maybe the cornerstone on creating architecture. And this is also an office in Timberwood in France, where we decided also to be exactly inverted like this project here that you have on the right. Not keeping the void and the landscape for us, but then offering this to the city. So then this strange shape came here just to create these two gardens that are connected to the urban fabric, instead of creating a patio where you keep the space. So this is very also a strong position, so that creating two gardens that you can offer to the city define the shape of the building itself. So then the building made of wood is just in between a garden. So then you can see the floor plan, and then these voids, and then these openings of the streets, and then this very wild garden. I will come on this just a little bit after, about the way we think that landscape should keep a little bit of wildness also, and then something that is more ecological and can welcome biodiversity. Again, simple collective housing and gardens in the canal in Pantin. This is very near from Paris, and how you can imagine that creating this central garden defines the typology of the building, opening these courtyards and creating a relationship between the city and the inside of the project. So this is a facade on the canal, very simple, very open, so that people can have this connection with the great landscape. And then opening the street, instead of closing here all the area and the plot, then creating opening so that the people from the city can enter this garden during the day. So that was also hard to convince the client, but offering this space to be shared with the public. So you have this section with the different buildings, and then this garden, which is on the courtyard, then comes up on the roof of the little houses that are in the middle, so that this is creating a garden for the people, and then a roof garden only made for bird and insect and not for the people. So then this inner courtyard is open to the city, and that creates also this relationship, so that a public space, a garden, can really be somewhere where people can meet in the city, and not closing this too much to the private area. So that leads us to the second part of the lecture.
Perfect transition. So pathways and permission. From a social point of view, rethinking the relationship between the city dweller and the living is an opportunity to create a civic organization that revolves around a relationship with the ground, the earth, and the living world. A garden does not simply occupy a plot of earth, it also mobilizes the mental space and helps to reconnect with experience. Doing and observing, readjusting our acts as we go along rather than deciding on everything beforehand. From privacy terraces to communal gardens, the collective experience of shared activity unites people around a common practice. The density of cities does not necessarily create social bonds, but gardens in cities do have this power. They bring a community spirit, a community spirit into the urban space, introducing a way of rethinking equality and sharing.
Okay, on this subject, I will show you some projects like this collective housing, social housing, affordable housing in Chevilly-la-Rue near Paris, where also we decided to create a lot of links between each building and create different spaces for the people to be shared. So here you have several blocks. We exploded the program in like 5 different blocks that could be links between this garden here, for the people of the city to cross here, and then also roof garden here that can be connected just with simple footbridges. So the idea that this garden can create a communal life and then that allows people to spend time a little bit more together. So I think this is very important, so that these gardens are good for environmental reason, but also for social connection between people here. And then this rooftop is, because this is social housing, so every space is very tiny. So these spaces, which is shared between all the housings, are spaces where people can share around this garden. I mean, garden, as Pascale was saying, has this power of being shared between people. Another project which is also very much defined by urban and landscape thought is this management school in timber in France that we just finished last year. And you can see here on the master plan the way that we divided the building in two, so that this space in the middle is also a garden that can be shared by the people from the city. They can cross the school during the day, and it's becoming a fold, creating views from the street to the canal there. So that instead of having one big block, then suddenly the landscape between the two buildings is a shared space between the students and the people from the city. So creating again, this garden has this power of bringing people together from private and public. So this is in the wood structure, so you can see this difference between the massive wood on the first floor, and then it's getting more and more light, because of course it's different than concrete, so you have to adjust the quantity of wood you can put in a very simple frame. And then the ground floor, when the garden, you can enter here and then cross the entire school to go on the other way, on the other street, so that you can see this. And the stairs, which are also exit for fire security, becomes also outside terraces for students and places for them to spend times. So a few images from inside the school, which is very simple and rational structure. And then of course this garden that is connected to the passerelle, the footbridges around, and then have this fantastic view on the city. I want to jump on scale and speak about also a project that we are working on the construction will start next year, is the metamorphosis of one of a tower, which is inside Paris, La Tour Montparnasse. It's a tower from the 70s, and we are doing this with a collective of architects, it's ChartierDalix, and 2 other offices from Paris, Ardel Le Bihan and Franklin Azy. Tour Montparnasse is this lonely, dark tower emerging from Paris, and it was built in the 70s. It's pretty much hated from Parisians because voilà, they don't know exactly why this tower is emerging very alone and has no public relationship with everything. So this was a huge trauma during the construction, because they had to destroy half of a neighborhood to build this. So for Parisian people, it was very violent. And then you see pictures from this construction here. And then we were thinking when we entered the competition, we were quite young architects. It was like 8 or 10 years ago. And then we were facing very great offices like OMA, like Dominique Perrault, like Jenny Gang. And we were like, okay, that's why we created this collective and say, what could be our idea? And our idea is that maybe Parisian doesn't like this building, not because it's dark or it's like this or I like or I don't like, but maybe because it's just close to the public, because it's just totally private space where no one can access. And then when you have such an impact in the landscape, like this object, and you never went there, then we think that this is also creating this problem. I mean, when you often go to a place, you don't ask yourself if you like it or not. It's part of your day. So we decided to reprogram it, to make it really multi-program with offices, with hotel. It may be for you. In America, it's like very usual, but in France it's not very usual to have this, to have an hotel in a high rise. So creating an hotel and creating also several different spaces like gardens. And we think that, so we decided to also that this tower has to be really responding to the urban horizontal fabric in France, and then creating so balconies in the 10th first floor. And it's also interesting because in a high rise, when you are on the 5th floor, then you have the same condition than on the 35th. But this is not the same environment. I mean, why can't you go outside when you are on the 5th floor? Why don't you have this relationship with the city? So we decided to anchor and to seek horizontally in a vertical building, and then create these outside spaces and share gardens. So all this reprogramming shaped the tower in a different way, and then creating these outside spaces, this horizontal, this garden, which is in the middle of the tower, accessible to public. And then also now the question of landscape and vegetation is maybe a little bit more far away than in other project, but you can see that enlarging the base and creating this garden allows us to collect the rainwater on the facade that drops directly onto this garden here, and then also collecting rainwater in the glass house that you have on the top. So then, by collecting the rainwater from the tower, we can create an autonomous garden on the 15 floors, which is open to the public. We were also responding to the wind. You know that the worst enemy of a tower is the wind, because this is what creates the most strong forces. So we decide to use the wind and create these facades with this pattern moving one to the other to create small depressions here and then make the air naturally enter inside the tower. So using the natural element, the rain, the wind, to try to make this tower become use a little bit less of energy, and then creating also this glass house that ends the project, that ends the tower with a magnificent view on Paris. So you see that creating this landscape and these gardens can also create these social links between people inside the city. But I let Pascale introduce our last part.
Materiality and biodiversity. From an architectural point of view, the installation of the living within the build offers an opportunity to call into question architectural fundamentals. The ground, the wall, the roof. When we walk on a roof, it becomes a ground. If we plant on it, it becomes a garden. When we model its topography, it becomes a small piece of geography. The roof is no longer a simple covering, it takes on several roles. The same approach can apply to a wall, which become lived in by fauna and flora, redefines itself in terms of both form and functions. the ephemeral and perishable character of the living also implies calling into question our relationship to time, the uncertain, and the random. Duration becomes an indispensable factor for the grounds of plant and challenges the concept of completion, fitness, and fragility. This vision constitutes a veritable laboratory for us and allows us to test new means of expression.
So now we are going into a more research part of the office. As you've seen on the previous project, we were using more the landscape and imagine these two discipline, architecture and landscape. They have always been one side by side, but we think this is super important to merge them. And now I want to present you some projects that were redefining our way to imagine maybe architecture. This is a school that we finished, that we built it like 10 years ago near Paris. The School of Biodiversity. This was a competition that we enter, and the city in a very dense area, they wanted a garden, they wanted a school. So they say, maybe we could put just a garden, public garden on the roof of the school. So, okay, let's think about it. This was the main subject. So we enter, we design this school with this form where you have the kids on the courtyard, and then maybe also the roof is a place for the kids to learn. So they can walk on this roof, as Pascale was saying, which become the new soil, and then experience the way that you can have with the meadow, with a prairie inside of the city. And maybe some of these kids, they don't go to the countryside every weekend. So I think it was also for us very important so that they can experience something different. And then suddenly this roof is becoming something different than a roof. It's a place for the kids to learn. It's a learning tool also for them. I mean, all the teachers, they take the kids on the top, they learn them what is a leaf, what is an ecosystem, and so what is interesting here is that this roof is not only good for environmental reason, reducing the heat water, retaining rainwater and everything, and good for biodiversity, but it also a place again to create social relationship very strong between people, between the kids during the day and between the people, because this is accessible by the people of the city by this little house here during the weekend. And we were really pleased that after 10 years, this roof is really becoming a small forest on the top of this building. And it's quite working, because if you see the section, then this garden is on the top of this sport space under it, so that the relationship between the program is also very, very interesting. But maybe okay, this is a green roof, natural green roof, without too much irrigation and a place for the kids. But what is very interesting here that we try to push is the relationship between the permeable ground that you have here, the roof here, through the facade. And then the facade becomes also a component from this architecture and play a very different role. Because, I mean, architecture was thought at the very beginning to protect against water, maybe in Miami also against the sun, but mainly to protect against water. But when you think vegetation, you need water. So it's the first paradox to think about it. How do I deal with this huge paradox? So retaining water on a building is maybe something that is too complex, that is maybe not so sense. But slowing water, I mean, collecting water and slowing it so that this facade now is more an irrigation system, because it's a way to slow the water that comes down from the roof to the ground. And if you see on this diagram here, you can see the path of the water. Every block is like something that brings the water very slow from the roof to the ground. Like this play for kids, you know, where you put a small ball on the top of the things and then it's fall down every day. So that on this first experiment, we had no soil onto this vertical system. rather than very small ones. So it's more like micro landscape, like on a rock wall that appears on this project. And then suddenly we had to design things that we were not very much able to design, because we are used to think about people and then programs that we daily think in architecture. But then suddenly we have to design an irrigation system, and maybe an hostel for insect, and maybe small hole for a bird, so that it questions us about the scale of architecture. Now we have to think. Everybody knows this drawing from Le Corbusier, which is Le Modular, modern architects from the 50s in Europe, thinking that all the architecture has to be thought about the human scale, you know. But maybe it's interesting also to think now that there are other scales to think in the city, which is the scale of the rest of the living. I mean, you have to understand me. I don't say we were having this discussion with Lily. We don't draw houses for birds. I mean, it has no sense. I don't know what the birds needs, but maybe creating situation, cracks, holes, depth that allows this living to install themselves. The building as a situation. And we like these images because we were working with botanists that came on the building and that were collecting all the species to understand how it works. And they made like this herbarium out of the school. And I like this representation of this architecture as an herbarium, you know, almost like this David Hockney, I don't know if you know this, like representation with this fragmentation of images. So they were photographing and then seeing every one of these species that are on the project. So now the facade is quite strange, it's getting a little bit dirty, a little bit, you have all these different little species that are coming here, the fauna and flora. And after sorry, it's in French, but between 2016 and 2021, we have more than 345 species that are installed on the roof of this and on the facade of this school. This is almost what you have in a small urban park in the city. So this is in a way interesting to see that we didn't install all these little insects and things like that. So nature in a way is doing things, and then when you create the right situation, then things can really happen. So then we decided maybe how we can understand a little bit more these systems. And then so we decided with a couple of teachers from the school and ecologists and French botanists to collect seeds also from very ancient meadow and prairie near Versailles in Paris. So we were collecting seeds, very ancient prairie, like more than 400 years. So with very interesting seeds, collecting seeds and having actions with the kids to replant part of the roof that were maybe not so much good functioning. So people from the office, teachers came with the kids and then having actions on the roof just to replant it. I like these images because this is at the end of the summer. And then once we were also there with Pascale, and then the mayor of the city came on the roof, and he was looking at this and saying, "What's happening? It's all burned. It's all yellow and gold. It's burned. It's not working." But then, so we were speaking with him and saying, "Okay, if you go to the countryside at the end of the summer in at least in Europe, it's very dry. It's very burned. It's very yellow. So why should it be different here?" So everyone has in his mind the vision of the nature with perfect grass, green, always the same color. I know that here in Miami it's not the same that we have in Europe, but it's interesting to see that when we create this artificial landscape in a way, then it also reacts to the season in a different manners. So what we think that we wrote in this book that was out in 2019, I gave an exemplar to Lily for the library here, is that thinking with vegetation, landscape, nature, fauna, flora, it's interesting in very different kind of things. It's good for environmental reason, I was thinking. It's interesting in social reason, because nothing brings more people together than a green space, and being again, actors on their building, on their environment. I mean, buildings are getting more and more technological, you know, it's more like your iPhone. You just come in the building, push a button, it works alone. And in a way, it makes people a little bit more far away from their environment. So I think that if you put a garden on a building, then people are acting on that and becoming an actor. So interesting environmental reason, social reason, and architectural reason, because then a roof, a wall is something different than what it was. And I think it questions our way to think about architecture. And we like this sentence of an architect, beginning of the 70s, Koning Morfcraft, and he did this article in Designing for Survival in Architectural Design, July 1972, and he was the one who invented this idea of permaculture. Permaculture is this sentence that each element should be capable of performing more than one function, and conversely, each function should be performable in more than one way. It means that when you design something, it must be not only for one purpose, it must serve a lot of different things, a lot of different situations, you know. And this is something interesting. This is push us also, while we had this building finished, to go a little bit more into research, into the research about why couldn't we build a vertical soil? Not a green wall like we can see in malls and things like this, but maybe really an autonomous vertical soil based on the concept of the school, but with really soil. So we were looking at concrete, because concrete is very practical, is not very interesting for carbon footprint, but it's also very close to rocks and things like that, at thermal inertia and things. So we were thinking how we could, you know, pour concrete and create this mold interesting, where you have this soil that can pass through a block, and then so that can be held in a vertical way. And we discovered also that this creates a very interesting materiality, very interesting things playing also with mycelium, because this is mycelium has this capacity of creating its own soil when it dies, and then when it regenerates. And also we really like this materiality without making too far effort, this complementarity between plants and concrete. And then we applied this concept on this project here with this new headquarters of the hospital administration in Paris. Again, think of the first part of the presentation. You have here the site, the plot was this square here. All the other competitors were creating a courtyard. But we decided in this very dense area that we shouldn't keep this space for us and then give another garden to the hospital, which is here. So we divided the project in two, with one part, which is that one triangle is a project, and the other triangle is a public garden for the hospital. And so this is a very simple office building with balconies, outside spaces, that allows also this building to be reversible and to become housing. I think this is important also to think about when we think about rehabilitation, that buildings can be changed in another program. And balcony is exactly the definition of permaculture. It's a very simple architectural artifact, but has many roles. A balcony protects from the sun, allows you to go outside, allows you to clean the facade without having strong machines, allows you to, for security, fire, at least in Europe, it's very convenient. So one simple things in architecture has a lot of different roles. And I think balcony, which is something very common, is one of these. So you have this very simple plan with this triangle. One is built, one is a garden. And then these very simple lines, shapes of the balconies that allow people to come outside. You have the garden here on this part. But I want to talk a little bit more about the garden that we create here on the top of an auditorium again. So here you can see that this garden is almost a hill on a very flat land where people can climb. And then having a moment of peace here while they are being treated in the hospital. So you have the views outside. And then here we applied this research that we did between the garden here and then the permeable ground. We had this connection of a soil, so that if you imagine that the green roof now is not cut it from the outside, but is in connection with the permeable ground, with the ground, so that when it rains on the roof, then the rain just comes down through the wall and then go to the ground. And when it doesn't, by capillarity, the water that is in the ground can grow up. And then imagine all insects and small biodiversity are able to take these secondary roots to go on the building. So we wanted to find a very simple way to build it. So with the workers, with the contractors, we were like, okay, how we can do it without designing this? So they had this idea, not us, they, by having these little plastic bags, put it sand into it, and then just creating this shape, very simple, pouring concrete on the top, and all these panels that were put here. So you have also the soil that is inside and the roof, and then at the end it produced this. So you have the garden here, accessible during the day for the people from the hospital, and then the relationship between the garden here and then through this wall to the permeable ground. Then we thought, okay, concrete is nice, it's very simple, you can pour it, but it's a little bit not so good for carbon footprint. So maybe we should think about other materiality to do this, what we call the biodiverse wall, where the structure of the wall is the structure of the soil. It's not 2 layers. Okay, I should go a little bit. So we make different study like bricks, terracotta, and dry stone. And we have the chance to be in relationship with the Natural History Museum near Paris, and then they allowed us to do these prototypes. And then we plant them with the exact same seeds in the exact same place. And then we saw that the result was quite different. Dry stone is very good working regarding bricks, because it's not the same materiality, it's not the same void that you create. So then we were selected for creating a pavilion in the Design Biennale in Versailles in 2022. And we decided to apply this concept by creating this pavilion outside in a dry wall, in a very simple plan, this cycle, and a roof on the top of it. And so we conceived this dry wall where also we put it soil inside, and where the structure of the wall is the structure of the soil. We planted it. And then this is after the plantation there, no relationship to the ground. And the roof is again this irrigation system, if you remember, because all these little lines here allow the water when it rains to come down on the roof and then to irrigate the wall. And so this was the inside where we could put some photographies during the biennale. And then after 2 months, it was really spectacular how this vertical garden is on this wall, but is part of the wall, is part really of this structure. One last word, 30 seconds. I want to make a little teaser about the next book that we are going to prepare. It's a study about 19, what we call raised garden. I mean, rooftop gardens is now very common. It's in a lot of regulation through Europe and the world, but we discovered that it has an history. It has an history, especially in Europe. It has been centuries where these roof gardens were thought. So we had a study around 19 different gardens around 8 different countries, and trying to understand why the ancients were already using this idea of creating a garden on the top of a building. What a crazy idea, right? But they are in different location, various species. So we were visiting and redrawing a lot of different buildings. For example, the Palazzo Piccolomini in Italia, were built like 500 years ago, where you have already these gardens on the roof, on the top of another program, and then creating this fantastic landscape all over the country. Or for example, here in Paris, Villa Enbic, the first building that were built in concrete, reinforced concrete, where you have these gardens and also all the irrigation system taught into this tower that collect the rainwater and then allows them to have a roof on the garden. So voilà, it's almost finished. I think it will be out in the bookstore in maybe 1 or 2 months. And still the book, our monography, which is out now, it's like 15 years of project, 30 build-it project, only build-it project, because for us, like we think biodiversity and landscape and architecture, what is interesting is what is build-it. So let's build our dreams and merge vegetation, architecture, landscape, and social relationship. Thank you for your attention.
Can you hear me? Yeah? Okay, great. We're going to let you have a sip of water before we start. But thank you. Thank you, first of all, for visiting Miami and for this evening's presentation. The goal is for us to ask sort of 1 or 2 questions and then hopefully open it up to the audience so that they could follow up. And so perhaps I'll kick off the first question. I was very curious about the role of time in your projects. And because unlike architecture, although maybe you could argue architecture does operate this way too, but landscape evolves in ways that the architect can't always control. So I was curious what unexpected lessons have emerged from seeing your projects age. These could be good things or maybe things that failed, which you don't always present in a presentation like this. Can you share a little bit more about the lessons you've learned in watching your buildings age and grow?
Yeah, time is something that we learned a lot of different things when we were working on that project. The question of the depth, which is super important. I mean, all the architecture from the beginning of the 21st century is thinner and thinner and thinner, but we discovered that depth has such an interesting things by creating also capacity for vegetation to grow. And the question of time, because the building is finished, but the life's just beginning, you know? And so the question of time and how you imagine that things are going to happen, maybe sometimes is not exactly what's happening, but I must say it's often working like we thought it was, because we are not working alone, and we are really working with botanists, ecologists, and to choose exactly the right species that you are going to put on the building to start, because at the end, the wind and the seeds and everything and the birds can bring things, so it's changed. But if you succeed to create a system, something that is balanced, that there is no reason that it fall down. So time is super important. But if you think about this very technically, and this is something that we believe in very strong, we have to be very strong in technical details, so that what is the waterproofing, what type of soil, how do you manage to make it work, where the water is going out, where the water is, I mean, if you manage to maîtriser, to understand, to control all the technical details of this kind of project, you don't have so many chances that it doesn't work. So that's also important, because when you go to a client, you say, wow, if it's not working, if the waterproofing is not working, how is it if little water come inside the building and things like that. But if you applied a very simple and technical process, then it has no reason not to function.
Maybe just to follow up, you spoke that you're highly collaborative, so you have large teams. Can you shed a little bit more light on that process? So are your teams entirely in-house, or do you conglomerate different teams based on the various projects? Can you say a little bit more about your process?
No, but yeah, the process. I speak because I'm a little bit more fluent in English, but if you want to answer in French, I can translate, no problem. It's just, it's just, yeah, we have architects and landscape architects embedded at the office. And when we start a project, it's very important for us that architects and landscape architects are around this table. Gosh, these two disciplines have been so many centuries, one not against the other, but just side by side. And now I think it's so important that they are working together, so that when you think about the plane, you think about the void in the first act of architecture. So we have this, but we are not specialists, we are not scientists. And so we work a lot with people, botanists, ecologists, people, we discovered this like 6 years ago. In French, it's pédologue. It's just people that are specialists from the soil. What kind of soil do you put on a green roof? Because it's not like you take a tool and then you just dig a hole on the ground and you put it on the roof, you know? You can really create soil with dishes, with recycling material, with seeds, with, recycling also traces from the consumption. So it's very interesting that you can create a soil from almost nothing, from traces, and then understanding how it works, how light it is, because you cannot put too much white on a structure, especially if you think in wood, and then what kind of waterproof you use. I mean, waterproof is 30 years of life, right? So first you think, okay, I'm going to plant an oak trees that is 300 years on the roof of that building. But maybe you should also think that if you plant something on a roof, then it's important to think about the life of the waterproof. Because if I have to redo and to change the waterproof in 30 years, maybe I should plant things that can last 30, 20, 40 years. So then when I act on the roof, it's also the same cycle of life between the building and the vegetation you put on that. So yes, we work a lot with different specialists and scientists around. So just to be precise, because I think it's a matter of precision. But like the building, I mean, like the construction science, structural science engineers, and I think it's the same. We just have to be precise on that.
Yeah, your answer makes me think of, and I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Andrew, that we could either build the landscape so it matches the life of the weatherproof, or better yet, we could change the construction, which I suspect is probably some of the examples that you're seeing on the wall, to maybe even pursue this thick wall construction. So the architecture has the capacity to last perhaps as long as the landscape. Yes. And that would be a marvelous thing. So, yeah. Andrew.
Yeah, so related to that, when thinking of incorporating species beyond our own into the built environment, I think a lot of times there's a certain aesthetic preference embedded in the ethic of bringing in new species. So oftentimes architects who are drawing the environment invading buildings, they're drawing the cute little mouse or the beautiful butterfly, but they're not drawing the rat or let's say the mosquito or something. So you have talked about maybe the grass getting brown and enjoying that aesthetic, but are there any species that you'd be afraid to draw in your buildings? Or how do you go about the aesthetics?
C'est les différentes espèces qui sont pas forcément les bienvenues. Yeah, the same way, for example, pigeon, everybody were in Europe and suddenly you have tons of pigeon everywhere. But if you don't want pigeon to come on a facade where you create little crack situation for birds, you just not go over 4 or 5 centimeters hole, because they need, their home is like this type of hole that you have to create into the facade. I don't know if I'm clear, sorry, but voilà. So you have to think about certain conditions so that you are not maybe welcoming all the different species.
Mais je veux dire en français, tu as il y a aussi il y a une invasion d'animaux ou de végétaux. Enfin, les invasions, elles viennent aussi d'une disproportion. Et cette disproportion, elle vient aussi d'une mauvaise gestion écologique.
She said that when you have an invasion of one species, is that because the balance of the ecological system that you create is not good. That's why in the cities you have suddenly tons of rat, of pigeon also. So if you succeed to create an ecological balance, a system, an ecosystem, then you will not have one species that comes.
C'est pour ça qu'on préfère travailler des milieux, des systèmes écologiques, et c'est ce que l'on installe sur les toits et sur les façades, plutôt qu'une collection horticole qui, elle, met côte à côte des plantes qui n'ont pas de relation naturelle dans la nature.
Yeah, it's very difficult what she says. But,
can try,
it's very precise, but that's why we try to create systems and not a collection of plants, which is nice, but that have no relationship one to the other. Remember again the sentence from Colin Moorcraft, and it's permaculture is exactly like that. Permaculture is planting plants one near the other that interfere one with the others and that create a balance, a system that is autonomous, you know?
And maybe we think that in a building, it's an artificial place, so it's impossible to make natural things. And it's the inverse, the contrary. It's not the contrary, but it's independent. So we can make systems unlike the School of Boulogne. We make a system, very natural systems. It's why we have 350 spaces, and it's a lot. It's like you told today. You told it. It's like a garden on the.
Remember the pictures from Franco Fontana, the first one, which you think it's a very beautiful landscape, but maybe it's like 6 different species, and corn, olive oil, and maybe some different insects. And it's crazy to think that sometimes in our cities, you have more biodiversity than in a lot of different countries, especially when you have a strong agriculture and a very strong production.
But aussi, surtout, comment on dit surtout?
Yes.
Quoi? Ouais. Surtout, when we make natural pieces of landscape on the building, it makes a new landscape, urban landscape. It creates piece of landscape, natural landscape at different level of different places, and it will create maybe new sensation, and it's a new perspective of the town when we use this manner.
I mean, I think your response makes me think about the relationship between nature and artifice. So oftentimes we have visitors that arrive to Miami and think a lot of our landscape is in fact entirely natural. But the more you learn about our own landscape, and I suspect that might be true from where you come from, is that it is as constructed as our buildings, in fact. So the notion of artifice and nature, I think, are inextricably linked. But we want to be able to open it up to our audience. We have students in the audience and also faculty and probably outside guests. I don't know how to get the microphone to you, but is there anyone in the audience that would be interested in asking a question? There's a hand, a brave hand in the middle of the room.
While the microphone is going there, I don't like to use the word nature. Sometimes it comes out of my mouth, but I think nature is something we do not control. And we try to make as more as ecological system, but it's never nature. It's still artificial, you know. So nature is something you cannot control at the end.
Hello. I have a question. Has incorporating plants into your building construction changed the way that you think of structure?
What is true is that when you add a roof garden, it's creating weight on the building. So this is also a question. When you think now that we are maybe thinking lighter and lighter architecture, maybe using more woods and structure that maybe doesn't like to be too much constrained from the very important loads. So that's why we think more and more about very light soil. And I was speaking a little bit more about that too, so that, and very thin, light soil, not to put, because on the school you saw there is more than 1 meters of soil on the top, which creates also, that's true, a lot of constraint, a lot of loads and a lot of weight on the top of, so voilà, exactly. So this is also a paradox that we have to resolve. And when you think vertical, then it's a little bit different. So that's why also it's interesting to think vertical, because it's not the same load, because you don't have any, you know, beams that is connected under a roof, but it's directly going to the ground. So vertical landscape is also an answer to this weight and to the question of the soil.
There's a question here, front.
I just wonder, when designing for these, not just rooftop, but also wall gardens, how do you have to take into account light? Because obviously all the plants, they need the light, and also people, in order to enjoy where they are, they need the light.
I don't think I get exactly your question. The question of the light?
What do you have to, what additional considerations when you have a building like that do you have to make sure that there's sunlight for both for the people and for the plants?
Yeah, it's a question of orientation, I guess, no? I think those facades, those walls have to really face some special orientations, because when you build this kind of facade facing north, it's totally different than facing south, because you really don't have the same type of vegetation on these two different orientation. But facing south, we create another school, which was not in the presentation, where we use the vegetation also to create sun shades on the facade. So then again, this is another role, another interaction between vegetation and architecture, how you can maybe use this vegetation to control the sun that comes on the facade. It's very ancient, I mean, it's very clear. But when you think about this and trying to find some plants that lose their leaves in winter and then again comes to life in summer, then you can control the light, because you need the light in winter, especially in Europe when it's cold, to get, you know, sunny sun and then natural warming inside the buildings. And then when it's summer, it's good that you have all these leaves to block the ray of the sun from inside. So again, you have this relationship between heating a building, protecting from the sun with the vegetation. So it's another way. I don't know if I really answered your question, but voilà, there is a relationship between the two. You're totally right. That's the constraint between the.
Like the orientation. I think also, yeah, I think it ultimately goes down to maybe what he was talking about earlier, where some walls are very opaque.
Yes.
Because behind it are maybe
Okay.
uses that don't need.
Voilà. Okay, I understand. Yeah.
And then I think the
Yeah.
orientation has to do with.
I totally, okay, I understand. It depends the program you put inside. You're right. It's maybe more simple when you do something in front of a program that doesn't leave too much natural light inside. But you can also play with very light facade with wires and with systems that allows still to be windows on the facade. So it's not exactly shown on that project, but yes.
Are there any other questions? There's another hand.
Yes.
Hello. Hello again. So I really enjoy your notion of precision in bringing these biophilic designs. And so these positions are like a framework, right, to facilitate the life beyond human that we are in this ecology. How does that like position apply to death and decomposition? Because there's life, that means there's death too. So it's a cycle. So either it's like the decomposition of these little species or the decomposition and decay of materials. So I want to ask about like how you prepare for that.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. And so it's also this this question of time, and in a way this question of maintenance, because we didn't spoke about this, but I mean, how many times do you have to come on the building to maintain it, and also on a roof garden to maintain it? So that's why we try to create the most autonomous system as possible, so that maybe on the school we showed you, it's 1 or 2 times a year that you have to come on the roof, just cut the prairie, the meadows, take it out. So we try to lower also the maintenance, because it's important for the owners and the clients. And then, so that, of course, you have to maintain plants, and plants are dying and new plants are coming. So try to think about different species that doesn't need too much maintenance. The question is not cutting every day and thinking about this. It's more like having a cycle where you just have to come 1, 2, 3 times a year, just to renew the landscape in a very simple way. And after the question of materials, qu'est-ce que tu veux dire quelque chose? La matérialité de la façade et l'évolution du béton des façades.
Toucher la fragilité, et de notre tolérance, la manière avec laquelle on accepte que, en premier, on commence par avoir des algues, par avoir des mousses, par avoir des choses qui sont justement pas très bien tolérées, plus comme des nuisances, et que petit à petit s'installe une végétation qui est adaptée et du coup
Yes.
qui se pérennise.
And then the materiality, the concrete, for example, it will get a little bit different, a little bit dirty. First you will have some mosses, and then after it's getting some algae, and then maybe it change this materiality. But I think this is part of it. The building is not going to look the same just after the completion. I mean, architecture is always about this. When you finish a project, then your client wants the images, but then it will change. 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, it will change. And this idea of time and that architecture is not exactly like the renderings it was, I think is also something interesting.
A little follow-up to that. Buildings, not just the plants die, but the buildings inevitably become in disrepair and no one's maintaining them. What's the consideration with these buildings that are sort of, in a sense, living buildings, for when the owner stops maintaining the building and say 300 years down the line, how is it having a building that is sort of intertwined with the landscape affect what's going to happen with that building?
Sur la végétation qui meurt.
La question du temps du bâtiment et temps. I think the cycle is quite different, no? Because architecture lasts a long time, and then I think the landscape is as maybe a cycle that is. I think the idea is to match these two cycles, not to have different. But I think the cycle of a building is much longer than the cycle of a landscape. So I don't know. I think it depends.
It depends.
Ouais.
It depends. One would hope.
So you think the landscape would die first?
It's difficult to answer that.
Depends. I think I think your example about the weatherproofing, for example,
Ouais.
you refer to the weatherproofing that only lasts 25 years if you're lucky. But if you go into the Hinoki cypress forest of Japan, the cypress there are 300 years old.
Wow.
So it's relative, you know? But hopefully we can make some great ruins. you know?
Yes.
We can think about the building in ruin, but I guess, Lily, I don't know, you're the coordinator of everything, but I don't know if there's another question out in the audience. No one's asked anything about the architecture per se, about the timber. There's interest in that. I don't know. So are there any other questions? Well, if there are no other questions, do you have one?
Yeah, sure. So architectural, is this, I don't think this.
Maybe.
There we go. Yeah. Okay. So Architectural Review wrote an article about you where they described your work, and the title of the article was something like Machine for Life. And you all described buildings that you have done that are both new construction and renovation. So here in a much younger country, as we look towards, in a young city like Miami, as we look towards doing more renovations, how are those different machines for life? A renovation project versus a brand new project where, let's say, you can design a new wall system.
No, you're right. And I think renovation is one of the most important also change that we have to face in the next coming year. And the question of what is, I mean, the question maybe 10 years ago was, why should I keep this building? And now I think the question is, why shouldn't I keep this building? You know, because it's there, because it's part of the city, because this structure is already here. So why destroying a structure to build another one? Because it's also the history, the culture of the people that have lived around. So I think renovation is one of the big challenge that is coming. But then, of course, when you think about the renovation, maybe the building is not meant or thought or ready to welcome something different than it was. But yeah, it's, I don't know.
Comment est-ce que tu plans, comment est-ce
Sur
que
un
tu mets-
building que tu rénoves.
There is a different solution. I think you can use when you are the stairs and the lift. It's space where there is more structure. So you can put some soil at this place and more, maybe sometimes we put 1 meter when you have this structure. You can charge les côtés, les façades, near of the facade, the edges, because the structure sometimes generally is more strong at this place. So you have to adapt your landscape, what you want to do, add what you find like structure, but it's possible.
We did
And
it.
sometimes you have possibility to make to put a lot of soil. So if you put 5-10 centimeters, and you can make something very interesting with 10 centimeters of soil.
Maybe on that note, it reminds me when you say you can do meaningful things in just 10 centimeters, is it, of soil, which is less than 10 inches of soil. It reminds me there's a psychologist by the name of Colin Ellard, and he works at the intersection of neuroscience and the built environment. And he reminds us that only 10 minutes in nature changes the brain chemistry, our brain chemistry, for the better, in fact. So I think your work reminds us how we might be able to integrate nature in both small and large ways within your body of work. So thank you for visiting us and for the presentation this evening. And thank you all for coming out and joining us.
Thank you very much.